So, hello everyone, welcome. As Laura said, I'm Bernadette Wesley, and I'm sitting here in Portugal. I'm originally from the US, you can probably tell from my accent. I've lived here about 10 years. This is my home. I live up in the north near the border of Spain with my husband and two daughters. And I'm certified in sociocracy through SOFA. And what I do is bridge also my experience with inner adult development and mind-body therapies so that people can use sociocratic structures well. And that's kind of the foundation of what we're going to be talking about today. And I have with me, I'm so honored, two wonderful clients and colleagues that I work with. We have Danella Cercli, from the Purpose of Recovery, and she's in California. We have Myra Stewart from ISWI in the UK and Sarah Whitley, also from ISWI in the UK. And they've been working with me over this past 6 months and a year to really implement a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So you're going to get the pleasure of hearing their stories. So it's not just theory and ideas, it's people actually feet on the ground implementing this stuff. So we'll have like 10 minutes of each. I'll give a 10-minute intro. And then I think Danella will speak for 10 minutes and share some stories. Thank you, Danella. And then Myra's going to share some of the experience from ISWI as well. And then we'll have 20 minutes of Q&A. So really do start tracking your questions, and we will spend lots of time there. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So becoming an adaptive learning organization. So the question that I like to sit with and with all the people that I work with is, how do I respond to what is being asked of me when everything is constantly changing and the old ways of working are no longer working? Seems that we're all in this state on some level. And in some circles, we call this context VUCA. You've probably heard of this. Stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So these are the waters that we're swimming in. And so this creates, we've always been in a type of VUCA condition. It's kind of what life is. But I think we never really realized it so much in the past. Things seemed business as usual. There was a type of stability that we relied on. Now it's so much more obvious with institutions breaking down, all of the complexity that we're facing. It's just much more, we're feeling it and we're experiencing it much more visibly and tangibly. So that's why being an adaptive organization is more and more important in these times that we're living in, of how to live in these types of conditions. And the approach that I use to that is a three-prong approach, you'll see with the triangle. So structure, culture, and capacities. And the container is called self-managing developmental organizations. And you'll find out why as we move ahead, because the first part that we work with is structure. And of course, that's the self-managing part. And that would be the sociocracy part, the power with. We're not going to go into this because we're going to go more into culture and capacities today and how they integrate. But just so we have shared understanding, of course, these are some of the aspects of sociocracy. If you're new to sociocracy, these are some of the key elements. I'm not going to list them all, but you can see them here. And the main one that we're going to jump off of is this last bullet, continuous learning and evolution, pretty much through feedback. But we take that through to a much deeper level than just, not just, but that through feedback rounds at the end, or we just go much deeper into how do we be a learning organization. So let's dive into that. Let's talk about culture and capacities. So the basic formula here, not a formula, but guideline, is that adaptive organizations work by combining these power with structures with the capacities and a culture and container that supports power within. Because otherwise we're really just, we can create same prison, different walls. We can have nice formats and structures on the outside, but unless we change our internal relational and beliefs and mindsets with those structures, we bring all of our baggage with us, don't we? I mean, we've all been programmed from childhood to behave in certain ways in groups, socially, from schools, from previous jobs and work, even from traumas from those previous experiences. The truth is we bring all of who we are to work, and all that's going to show up. And it's not just a magical leap to say, hey, well, now we're going to do sociocracy. There's so much more that's happening beneath the surface in order for that to work well. So first, before we go into those bits, I want to just give a shared understanding of what me and my colleagues at Evolute 6 came up with our definition of an adaptive organization. So we have shared understanding there. So an adaptive organization embraces change and drives innovation. Number two, understands the pivotal role of culture and learning in shaping their success. Number three, proactively adjust their strategies, structures, and processes to rapidly respond to market demands, technological advancements, which we know is constantly stressful and changing, and to what people need. And number 4 and 5 are where we focus on today in a self-managing developmental organization. We nurture personal development, collaboration, and resilience. And number 5, here's a key differentiator. We recognize that the challenges that most people are facing can be categorized into two distinct types, technical and adaptive. So let's just look at that. Did I do this one already? Yeah, okay. So let's look at that. I'm sure you've seen the iceberg model, but I just want to touch on it. Technical challenges, as you might know, they're more solvable with expertise. You can gain knowledge or take a class or build a skill. It's clearly defined. Usually there's not a lot of resistance, and it's usually somewhat linear. You can handle it. You're like, I'm just going to go learn that. I'm going to learn about public speaking, or I'm going to learn, where you need to grow on a learning edge. But the adaptive challenges are much more tricky. As you might know, they are more about, they're addressed through self-awareness, through self-reflection. They're more hidden, they're under the surface. And they involve perceptions, behaviors, mindsets, and mental models. So therefore, they're much harder to define. They can be, you can feel like you have an inner resistance to them, and they're much more nonlinear. They're much more complex. So let's keep going, because I think what I want to touch on is that most challenges today are adaptive in nature. And this is where we miss the mark a lot of times. We focus on the technical side of it and not the adaptive side. But here are some of what adaptive challenges look like. True growth and innovation occur when individuals feel safe enough to stretch beyond their comfort zones, pushing the boundaries of their capabilities. Number 2, fostering deep trust and an atmosphere that encourages risk-taking, experimentation, and learning from our failures. So that's very different than how we've really been trained and programmed to operate in our work life. We want to hide our failures. We don't want people to see our limitations. We want to look good. We want to look professional. It's all really normal and understandable, but the new ways of working require us to show up a little bit differently now. And in an adaptive challenge, it will empower people to surface and engage with their untapped potential. So we're not hiding ourselves anymore, and we're working on those learning edges. And they always will involve personal transformation. So that we talked a little bit about that. If you haven't seen the transformational learning talk that was earlier today, you can see the recording. It really connects nicely to this, to what we're talking about here. So adaptive organizations deliberately create the conditions necessary for individuals to explore their developmental edges. And if you have questions about the end, like more detail, what is a developmental edge? We can talk about that, but I'm just going to keep going and see how far we get. So let's go into an SDO. This is where we combine everything. The Sociocracy with being a developmental organization, we combine them and calling it an SDO. And that came from Graham Boyd and Bernard Possert originally. So I want to credit them. And then I changed it to self-managing organizations. So it kind of has a history here. And basically what we're talking about is that the external structures have to work with our internal capacities, okay, to have that power within. So it's like the two pedals of the bicycle. So you don't want to tip in one direction too far. We want to kind of keep them going at the same time, and we weave back and forth through our learning through both of those. And basically, so if I just highlight the three areas of that triangle, the top one was structure. Those are your power with structures. Those are the sociocratic patterns and processes. Another thing that I've added into the structure is something called a clue, ways of working, collegial letter of understanding. And I have a slide on that, so we'll get to that in a moment. And I think Myra's going to talk about a little bit about how they've used that in their organization. For culture, I focus on, which is really your container for working. My focus is based on Kegan and Lahey's work of being a deliberately developmental organization. And again, Danella and Myra will speak a little bit about that. And then in the Q&A, if you want to dive deeper into any one of these things, we absolutely can. For capacities, that's your power within part, where we're working on our inner capacities to use these structures well. And I focus on immunity to change process, which is also Kegan and Lahey, and also learning reviews, which is the sociocratic performance reviews that you're familiar with, but we've adapted them to be more of a developmental learning review. And we can talk about more of the detail of that if you want. So basically, the lingo here is a DDO, okay? It's called a Deliberately Developmental Organization from Kegan and Lahey out of Harvard. But basically what they're saying is that people development is not a separate activity or an additive to the business engine or the organization. It's an essential and integrated component of the organization. So with that, development requires a willingness to surrender familiar equilibrium for what will eventually be a new, more adaptive one. And that's what we're talking about here. And the thing is, if you're going to do that, if you're going to accept the invitation to make your personal learning public, which is what you're kind of doing in your team or in your organization, it's kind of what we're asking you to do. The most important thing is that you must believe that you have entered into like a kind of contract, and that this contract must feel like a sacred one, because without trust, none of this will work. So that's a theme through all of this. How do you build a culture of trust so that people feel safe enough to show up with their whole selves and make their learning edges visible to others? It's not a natural thing. It goes against a lot of our programming of self-protection, safety, inclusion, fear of rejection, all kinds of things come up. So I'm not saying it's not complex and challenging, but it is the call of our times. Because without this, we're siloing ourselves, we're cutting ourselves off into parts, and we'll never be able to handle the complexity that we're being faced with. We'll continue to try to do it business as usual, the old ways, and we will struggle. So this is an invitation that we're all embarking on and learning from each other. This is new ground. So don't feel like someone else has it figured out. We don't. We're all entering into these new waters and these new ways of working. So I think Myra's going to talk a little bit about their clue. I got this from the Lou's book, Reinventing Organizations. The Morningstar company used that language, but I've extended it into not just about how to work sociocratically together and you have an agreement, but full transparency about what working developmentally means to your organization. This is a super important foundational piece. It's explicit written agreement with members who want to work developmentally. This is what creates the safety and trust in the culture. So lastly, again, the motto is you can't have power with unless you have power within. They go hand in hand. And lastly, from Otto Scharmer, working on how you show up is the only thing you can have real leverage in. And this is something that I have lived by for most of my adult life and keep experimenting with. And I invite you into thinking about that and how that resonates for you, or if you've been playing with and experimenting with that, and you can bring it to the discussion at the end. So that's my overview. I'm going to stop sharing, and while we're making the transition over to Danella, I'm going to put, just because it's easier to do it now, I think, while we have the time, I'm just going to put some of these resources into the chat so you have it, and then we'll come over to Danella. So Danella, are you ready for us?
I am ready.
Yay. All
Yeah.
right.
Hello, everyone. So as you can tell, I'm also from America, and my state of origin is California, where I was born and raised, and then I lived for 17 years in Texas, which felt like I had moved to the wilderness. And I'm back in California. So if any of you have traveled or you are from the United States, you know the vast difference in culture and temperature between California and Texas. So I've been back in California since mid last year. And the reason for that transition was I helped to launch a nonprofit in 2020 that is intended to help individuals and families who struggle with substance use. And it provides coaching to those individuals and their family members to help them sustain long-term recovery. The name of the organization is The Purpose of Recovery, and our belief is that when people find their purpose, that helps them sustain long-term recovery from their addiction. And so that's the work that I've been doing for the last several years. By education, I'm a social worker. My first foray into sociocracy was running a democratic free school where we dabbled into sociocracy in our last year as well. I was the school head of school. And that was a wonderful, rewarding experience. And so just the values around sociocracy are very important to me as an individual and the work that I've been doing for about the last 15 years in my professional life. The reason that we really reached out to Bernadette and to really seek to transition our organization was multifold. Even though we're very young, we've already had a switch from starting with the holistic opportunity where we had consent decision making to then transitioning to a leader who was very hierarchical and all decisions went through her, and to now we're back to, okay, it's time to allow people creativity in their jobs and some control and to recognize the work that's being done. So we transitioned back to sociocracy at the end of last year and brought Bernadette in to help us make that transition as an organization. Hearing a little bit of that history, you might imagine that there was a little bit of trauma, a little bit of harm that was done over a 2-year period where individuals really did not have any autonomy or freedom in their jobs. They were very set into one particular mode. This is what you do. Here's your job description. Do not color outside the lines. And when our board of directors realized that we had some funding that came in that required a little more creativity and forethought and let's expand our horizons, that we had some individuals in the organization with plenty of talent and passion, but not the opportunity to put their talent and passion to work. And so in January, we started with our leadership team. There were 5 of us that began as team leads to really peel back the layers of that onion, if you will, or whatever type of fruit you want to talk about, maybe something more approachable as an orange, right? Let's get to the sweet fruit and really begin to segment out what's really important. What do we keep? What do we let go of? And one of the things that we needed to really hone in on was a shared vision. And I know that this is a strong part of sociocracy, but Bernadette shared with us that being a learning organization, we needed to make sure that our shared vision was really ingrained in each one of us. And that our systems thinking, that we could maybe let go of some of those things and begin to think cohesively. That our team needed time to learn together. And so we dedicated time every week for our leadership team to meet with Bernadette. And then we dedicated time for the rest of the team to start being exposed to this new way of working. And then giving our individuals time for personal mastery. When she talks about, and I'll get into that in a minute, I'm going to hold off on that for just a second. We also discovered that we had some significant challenges, not just the bottleneck of one particular leader needing to okay every purchase order and every check and everything that was coming in or going out of the organization, but we also found that by limiting our service hours, we weren't meeting the needs of our clients. And so our staff needed more creativity in their schedules to be able to work evenings or weekends if that worked for them, and to be able to say so. So we needed to be able to expand our service hours, but also to meet the overarching administrative needs of any organization. What we found was people were a little hesitant at first, a little afraid. We had to develop that trust that Bernadette talked about. And we had to surrender that familiar equilibrium that she quoted there from Kegan and Lahey. And I have a couple of examples. So, for instance, every year our organization puts on an annual rally, and we do this countywide. We invite community partners, and we invite people in recovery that are in treatment or in recovery housing, or maybe they're in long-term recovery, to come and celebrate recovery, to learn about resources in the community. And in years past, this will be our 4th annual rally. We serve about 300 people that day at lunch. So that's how we count our numbers. We know at least 300 show up to eat. But in the years past, everyone has been, again, assigned their role. You're going to cook. You're going to do the registration table. You're going to call people, without any real efficacy of saying, that's not really my strength or my interest or my passion. And so when we began to talk about our rally this year, we said, okay, we would like for each person to self-select the role that they would like to have. What committee would you like to sit on? And then each of the committees operated in a very sociocratic method where we have a team lead for that committee. We have someone who's holding the administrative task for that committee. But people can come and go out of the committees depending on their interest organization-wide. And it was really interesting to watch the development of that. And I kind of have been moving in and out to kind of see how things are going. And we had an issue. Our venue would not confirm our date and our contract. We'd go down and visit them. We made phone calls, but we could not get them to confirm the contract. And so I'm getting frustrated. As a founder of the organization, I'm like, well, if they don't want us there, we'll go out and find some other place to hold our event. So I'm talking to my phone, speaking out a text that I'm getting ready to send that says something like, you know, we haven't been able to get a hold of you. We're a little disappointed. We need to know by such and such date. And if we don't work out for you, then we're just going to take our business somewhere else, or something along that line. So I fell into an old familiar role of, I'm going to take charge and we're going to make this happen. Someone overheard me giving this information to my phone. I hadn't yet hit text. And they said, hold on a minute. Can we talk about that before you send that text? Has this gone to the committee or the lead for that committee? Have they agreed to that particular dialogue that you're putting in your phone? And I'm like, oh my goodness, here I am. I value these practices and I'm violating them right now. And so I pulled back and said, you're absolutely right. It's time for us to take this back to committee, and the committee needs to make some adjustments to how maybe we're approaching this this venue. So it's just really beautiful that our organization is at the place now where we can have that trust. And it's been a very short period of time, within 5 months, someone can call me on that and say, that's not the way we're doing things these days, right? And I can say, you're absolutely right. Let me step back from that and take this back to the committee. So it's been really important that there, you know, all of us, from the founding team, the founding board, to the most recent hire, who are interns, are having the opportunity to learn and practice all of the ways of becoming a deliberately developmental organization together. Mindset of leadership is important. We had another one of our team leads said, you know, so many of us don't really know each other well. Can we do a fun personality profile? You know, the one that tells you if you're a lion, an otter, a golden retriever, or a beaver. And so the general circle said, yeah, let's do that. A couple of us are like, we're not really fond of those things, but okay, we'll do it, right? We're coming along and giving general consent. And so we sat together, and it was beautiful to see how when each person completed their very short questionnaire and then moved to the corner of the room that they most identified with, suddenly that built even more trust in the team. It was no longer, wow, you really annoy me because you're such a rules follower. And I have suddenly realized you're really a beaver and I'm an otter because I'm over here just want to have a lot of fun. I don't want to follow the rules, but I'm going to respect and admire that your rules are helping us to continue to be that deliberately developmental organization. We have to have some rules to have fun, right? And we got to have some fun and not get too tied up in the rules. And so it was really beautiful to see how a very simple example helped us to build and cultivate a trustworthy environment. I have now hit my 10-minute mark, so I'm going to pause there. And I know I have more to share if there are questions later. So thank you so much, Bernadette.
Perfect. Thank you, Danella. Yeah, many more stories there from Danella that if they come up in the Q&A, I'm sure they'll come out. What needs to come out will come out. But make a note of anything that piqued your curiosity. And now to you, Myra.
Hello, everyone. And thank you, Bernadette, and thank you, Danella. That was a fascinating talk to hear. I should maybe just warn you all quickly, and in the kind of principles of bringing everything into the room, that I'm on the tail end of a cold. So hopefully I will get through this next bit of time without a major coughing fit, but apologies in advance if anything like that occurs. So yes, I'm Myra. I work for an organization called ISWE. I'm a program manager there and now also organizational development lead. This whole process of becoming a self-managing developmental organization or a deliberately developmental organization is definitely still a work in progress for us. ISWE's main focus is around systems change and deliberative democracy on a global scale. So we're obviously very committed to this kind of power sharing, but how it was playing out in the organization as a kind of highly pressurized startup was maybe slightly different. I have a lifetime of interest in power sharing and commitment to that as well through a sort of long background in things like co-design and power sharing in kind of community work contexts, as well as a shared kind of passion and vocation for somatic practitioner type stuff with Bernadette to some degree. So I'm just going to go over and share the slides now and we'll get into the next part of things. Bear with me 1 second while I do that. Okay, so can everyone just see that? Okay, see the slides, it's coming through all right? Brilliant. Okay, so we've called this ISWE as an adaptive organization using sociocratic principles. And that's because the work Bernadette's come in and done with us and the work of Sociocracy has been really, really useful and informative to us. But part of our journey has also been finding all the ways that we need to continue to refine it and make it our own. Especially as this startup with quite a lot going on. So these are the kind of fundamental things that we've done and worked through so far. We started really initially Sarah, and then I was coming on board as a bit of an advisor, looking at the circle structure. Sarah, I should say, is the COO, kind of oversees all the sort of general sort of organizational structure, like kind of big HR type stuff at ISWE, amongst other things that she does. So she was having a look. She was very inspired by her previous sort of work for organizations like XR, sort of where she'd been volunteering, seeing how well sociocracy and circle structures could work in that sort of environment, and was really curious to bring it into what we were doing at ISWE. As we worked and developed that, we realized that having some outside support, reflection, expertise would be really valuable in our process. So it's at that stage that we recruited Bernadette in to help us with that. And alongside getting into supporting with us with that, she instigated a sort of training schedule of regular sort of sociocratic and SDO type principles, which were in a lot of cases incredibly helpful as well. We also came to a natural point where a number of people were needing to have performance reviews of some kind, or, you know, a kind of yearly review of some kind. So instigating the learning review process at that point naturally made a lot of sense. and we made a lot of progress of that, which I'll dive into in further detail a bit later. And we're also in the process, as Bernadette mentioned, of developing our collegiate letter of understanding or ways of working document. So yeah, again, going back to the triangle that Bernadette showed earlier, but this balance of these three elements of structure, culture, and capacities has been really important for us as well. That sort of at the moment, I think we're doing quite a lot of cultural work, but then you realize you've got to come back to the structure, you know, and then obviously, yeah, building people's capacities. Without that, it's not going to happen. So it is this kind of constant swing between the three, and noticing when one's getting out of whack and bringing more of it in, which is, yeah, as I said, something that we've benefited from and are continuing to kind of learn and experiment with as we go. So here have been some of the challenges faced so far. As I've mentioned, is still in that kind of like startup experimental kind of stage of things as an organization. We do some big projects, some global projects, but with not that larger team, and with a lot of the kind of pressures that can bring, also being, you know, an organization run by its founder, all of these kind of things, people's different expectations around this stuff. So capacity just to fully explore everything that these principles can mean in that organization has sometimes felt stretched, and justifying why, you know, things that might be seen as softer skills or things like that are so important is something that we continue to kind of, you know, grapple with and explore, but has been really useful. The linear approach to implementation didn't work for us, partly because of the above, really. We've had to kind of dive in, find the things that are most pertinent to us at each moment, and kind of grow those, and then come up to other things, be adaptive, move things around. One little example of that was that, you know, I think Sarah and I were both really excited about the concept of feedback at the end of all of the meetings. We could see the value of it. But for a lot of people in the team, that was actually a stretch that they weren't really comfortable with. Our meetings can often be very dense, full of a lot of information, sometimes some back and forth. I think communication in them has always generally been good and has got even better through the things we've learned, which I'll touch on later, but they still can be a bit highly pressurized, and people felt like other areas to give the feedback that weren't at the end of a meeting like that was already risking overrunning, was more helpful. So it's something we're continuing to, again, sort of acknowledge that we need those kind of regular feedback things. It's something that we kind of have built into some of our processes and are looking into where to build otherwise. So the circle structure, we really did find helped with role clarity and decision making. Again, ISWE, with the stage of organization it was at, and being a startup, didn't necessarily have like a clearly defined structure at all the levels when we first started diving into the circle structure in any way. So we've been able to build it kind of, you know, sort of organically from that position of something needing to be built, if that makes sense, rather than laying it over a pre-existing thing. However, that has also meant that sometimes finding the best structure and all of that, it takes time, because we're literally forming the whole organization as we move. And we've made some adjustments again to that circle process. For example, due to the size of our organization, we're a small to medium organization, sort of, yeah, depending on how you define it with contractors and things, I guess probably somewhere between 12 and 20 employees. So it didn't really make sense for us to have a general circle that didn't include all of the core employees at this time. Our general circle has ended up being the all team meetings that we have, because otherwise it would be a case of maybe like 1 or 2 team members being left off, which didn't seem like it aligned to these principles in other ways. Obviously, if and as we continue to grow, that's something that will need to change. Yes, the training schedule, actually some of these more you know, arguably kind of subtler things like communication skills actually were the ones that gave, I think, a lot of benefit. Things like NVC and deep listening, we got really, really positive feedback on team members, including team members who haven't, aren't involved in organizational development or any of that stuff, haven't shown an interest in this. I think that's partly maybe because we are overall an organization that's committed to power sharing in other ways and in more kind of, local, national and global contexts, that people could see these things mattered, but there were new principles, people sort of, one colleague in particular really shared that it was helping them reflect in new ways on how they communicated with colleagues, and how they communicated with family members, translating those things across. So that was really interesting and positive to hear. And it has, I think, helped with the baseline of communicating that we want to do. It's something to refer back to and make sure that we're kind of communicating in the ways that we want to. And again, I'll get into the clue in a minute. That's also somewhere where we can be doing that. So the learning reviews, as I said, we had a few team members who were coming up or needing something along these lines anyway. And we were really intrigued by the learning review process, or, performance reviews in sociocracy. It's definitely been a case of learn by doing. And sort of feeling like safe enough to experiment, good enough for now, safe enough to try. There's been positive feedback on all the reviews, but maybe we found that we've got better as time's gone on things like giving difficult feedback, or that feedback that is more about people's learning edges or constructive criticism in the right way. I'm one of the last people to have had my review, and actually the way that both the positive and negative stuff was held felt really balanced and gave me some good indications of things to work on. But yeah, like actually it's a learning edge to feel able to share difficult feedback in a group setting, especially. It's one thing when you've got, one line manager, one team member, and the line manager saying, this is what I think about what you're doing. But when you're in a group and you're going to have to see whether other people sort of agree or disagree with that to an extent, it's a learning edge to say the tough stuff. But it's so important. Some themes that have come out of our learning reviews, which feel very relevant to this process and are helping us grow on that more individual level, stepping into power and what that practically means. A case of that in my own learning review was actually to further develop in this work and share things around, the other work that I do somatically with clients and my prior stuff with communities in a whole new context, stepping into how organizations can transform and support that stuff for team members. And getting really clear on speaking and writing was another one that was important for us, making sure that we're not too verbose in meetings that are already long enough, things like that. Got a lot of big thinkers who like to extrapolate. Yes, developing the clue. This is very much still a work in progress, but already feels like it's showing fruit and is going to be incredibly useful and valuable in the end. We ran an initial kind of co-design workshop on it, which felt really fruitful and positive. People sharing the different statements that they did and didn't feel were valuable to ISWE as an organisation and how they wanted to work together. I'm now in the process of bringing that all together into a document, which is then going to be, go through a sort of regular consent process and a series of iterations. And in the end, it will be something that we've all agreed to and collaborated on together. It'll then go on and shared with new team members as they start and reviewed periodically so that it continues to be something that everyone in the organisation is consented to working with and that can hopefully help us with that kind of thing that Donella was talking about earlier, of those moments where you want to go, this isn't how we agreed we were working together now. It does feel like a form of documentation will be a useful part of that process for us. So yeah, it's just been really key to trust the process, the ups and downs, the learnings. It's one thing to say we're comfortable with failure and learn from failure, and it's another thing to see that thing that you could have done slightly better and be okay with learning from that and hold the sensation of it. So that's been a really positive thing, but an ongoing growing thing, I think. There's been a particular thing that's kind of come up through this process of anxiety around, there's a lot of people in the organisation who are really entrepreneurial, really up for helping, really up for like getting the job done, which is fantastic skill set to have in a team, but can also mean that sometimes people volunteer for the things that actually they're not the expert in the room on that, someone else is, and they didn't think about that, or even perhaps at times haven't been aware of that, which is where the ongoing circle structure and clarifying roles thing will hopefully also help. So there's been some moments in sort of open discussions about how things are going to get solved where that's happened. But what we have found is when the process is followed through to the end, people are allowed to share their clarifications, their objections. The conversation generally does work it out, and where responsibility belongs will settle, and the right people will be decided to go away and have those further conversations. So it's trusting that that does actually work, and that it might need to take a minute, but that everyone's kind of figured it out for themselves like adults, which is valuable in itself. So what next?
Oh, sorry, Myra, I'm going to have to interrupt you,
Oh,
darling, because we want to have time
sorry.
for Q&A. That's okay.
Oh
No
yeah, of
problem.
course. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. Flora just gently reminded me that if we want Q&A, we need to do it now because it
Yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
okay. So
Absolutely.
brilliant. Thank you
I
so
was
much.
nearly at the end anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So let's open the floor for anything that piqued your curiosity about what's been said so far. And you can just unmute and jump in, I think, or raise your hand if there's a lot of people. Okay, so Richard raised your hand. Let's see.
Yeah, sorry, a question. This collegial letter of understanding, was it?
Yeah.
Is that so? Is that more focused on how you work together to achieve visions and aims? It feels like there's a bit of overlap there. I'm not familiar.
It's more really the cultural agreements. How do we speak with each other? How do we handle conflicts? How do we implement some of this deliberately developmental practices by like sharing our learning edges and being transparent about that? So the traditional clue just had really sociocratic bylaws and consent decision making, what that all means. And you still need that, but I call that more the bylaws. And the clue, I've adapted it into really addressing this, what are our values? It's all the invisible stuff, let's put it that way, that you add in. And what you do is also include like non-tangible contributions, for example. Like, did we create something significant? Like when you're doing the learning review, it kind of feeds into that. It crosses over with the learning review because it's like, this is our guiding star. And then in the learning review, you can say, am I doing these things? The non-tangible things, not just the tangible things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Sure. So I'm seeing Anne.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about how you structure your you change performance evaluation. Say it again.
We call it learning reviews.
Right, and we've also adapted what we found in like many voices, and we now have role holder feedbacks. But I'm wondering how similar or how different they are. Over.
Does someone want to answer from our team, or do you want me to answer that one? Is there something coming to you about the learning reviews?
Sarah, do you want to share anything on that, or I can?
Yeah, you go ahead, Myra. You're doing so well.
Okay. So yes, it's basically a process. You start off, you invite a few people. So the person who is having the review takes ownership of it, and they invite a few people. You know, it would generally be their circle lead or people who they worked very closely with. So a combination of people who make sense within who they work with at the organization. For us, it's sort of, I think, defined as like between 3 and 5, but
can I just start to interrupt you 1 second? Was that your question about how to do the learning review? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Myra, but I want to make sure we're getting the question. And can you clarify really which part you want to hear about? Because it'll take a long time.
About how your learning review works and how it differs from what SOFA promotes as a
Okay.
performance evaluation.
So you do know
Okay.
about the Sociocratic performance review. We don't need to really explain that
Okay.
part.
Yeah.
Okay, he knows that already. So what's different about what we do? And I have a slide for that if we want.
Maybe, yeah. Do you want to get into it, Bernadette? Because you probably
Yeah.
know more about the sort of, and then I can say anything that's slightly different in what is we
Great.
do after what you
Okay.
say.
Perfect. Sorry for the interruption, but I want to make sure we get to it. So basically, we add in some non-tangible contributions so that you wouldn't find in a traditional role performance review. These are some of the 5 questions that we address, and people have a table that they can fill in of how well are they doing in each of these areas. So they evaluate themselves. And the we would be changed to I. These are general values, but it would say, did I create something significant? And they sort of rate themselves. How am I doing in each of these 5 areas? Did I care for another person? Did I face difficult circumstances with courage? Did I stay true to our integrity or process? And lastly, and really importantly, did I invest time in learning and growing now in order to create even better conditions for success in the future? So these are, like I said, all set up into tables. And the other part is you've identified a personal challenge and you're aware of your growing edges. I mean, that happens at the end of a performance review. You have an improvement goal, but this goes a lot more deeper in a way, a lot more deep in terms of recognizing this and making it transparent at a deeper level. So does that answer your question, Anne? I can't see you, but I'm assuming yes. Okay, yes, I got the nod. Anyone else? We have a few minutes left. I know someone has a question or a curiosity. We have 3 minutes. Yes. Oh, go ahead, Mara. Oh, and in
Do you all do performance type reviews, learning reviews with board members and kind of people who aren't necessarily just staff?
so that would be for Danella. Yeah.
Right. So I'm the board president and I've got a review. I got a 360. So, but they do expect, we just started the learning review process. Our first person to be our guinea pig is our director of people, our HR person. And she and I worked on it together. We did make a decision that for our first year of this transition, we're not going to do this with inviting other people into the review process. What we did do is send out anonymous survey with some questions that other staff members could give input because we had to build that trust, right? They didn't have the trust. And so we need a year of building trust. So we had a little modification that everyone knows next year, be thinking about who do you want to invite into your learning review process with you. So no, I will definitely be coming up for that process myself. Our other board members are not very active in our organization. And that is a process that we're trying to work on. We would like a more active board. And they realize it. We only have a total of 3 board members. The other 2 realize it, and they also would like to invite others. And so as we invite other board members, I do believe that that's going to be an important quality that we bring in and value that we bring to it.
It is 1:19, and we're supposed to wrap up at 1:20, but if somebody else has a short burning question, or Bernadette, how would you like to handle the closing of course, or
I was
anyone of
wondering
your
if
team
someone would
members?
ask about immunity to change. Yes, that's my passion area. So, and how it integrates with Sociocratic tools. Let me see if we can, in 1 minute. Let me just see if I can quickly pull something up for you. Well, gosh, you know, we talk about big assumptions a lot in immunity to change. What are our hidden mindsets and beliefs? And sociocracy is always challenging you. Really, it's a new way of working. So for me, without the immunity to change process included in it, we're missing this whole below the surface part of how we interact with sociocracy. So it integrates because it's a both and. I mean, you just have to go below the surface with the surface stuff. Or in my mind, you're just not going to be riding that bike. And in my experience and what I've seen with clients. So how it integrates with sociocratic tools. Well, with the learning review for sure, because we bring your map, your immunity map and your improvement goal into your learning review. So that's very specific integration. And then the way we work with, in meetings and transferring from task to process, allowing time and space for the human being during the meeting is a bit of NVC stuff, but it's really just all about integrating. It's really hard to answer in 1 minute, but did that answer a little bit?
Okay, wonderful. I just wanted to thank everybody for attending. I invite everyone, if you'd like, to express appreciations or maybe something you learned or inspired about in the chat. And I'd like to thank this team of speakers, which I believe is Bernadette, Danella, Sarah, and Myra. Thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot. I'm definitely inspired and want to Google at least a dozen things that I heard today. And I'd like to, SOPA would like to invite everybody to visit the Sociocracy for All donation page, which I can put in the chat for you. And that is all. Thank you so much.
I'm loving the comments in the chat. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah and Myra and Danella, for your time today. Really appreciate it. Someone asked about the slides. I'll try to make an adapted, it's kind of messy now, the slide deck. I'll try to put one in the recording.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Myra and Sarah, it's so good to see you both. I hear good things about your organization, and it's good to put a face and a name and an organization all together. So well done.
Yeah, good to meet you too. And I'm glad it seems to be going so well. I'd love to stay in touch to hear more about your journey as it unfolds.
Definitely. Yeah, that would be really valuable. It was fascinating to hear about what you've been up to. So thanks so much.
Well, it might be fun to pull our two teams into a Zoom sometime. And
Yeah.
we have about the same number. We have 12 staff, but about 5 more contractors we work with. So very similar size.
Yeah,
That
it's
would be
interesting.
wonderful.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, you could really learn from each other. You're on a
Yeah.
very similar track.
So I do have to run, and I think if I press this red button, it's all gonna poof. We're all gonna be
Yep.
separate.
Thank you, Flora.
It was
Yeah.
wonderful
Thank
meeting
you.
everybody. I'm really inspired. Thank you so much.
Laura, thanks so much for your facilitation. Appreciate it.
All right.
Okay,
Ciao.
bye-bye.
Well
Bye,
done.
Bernadette. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.